So what can we do about treatment switching? Well, there's no universally agreed solution. There are naive approaches, do nothing, exclude the patients who switch. These are definitely not recommended. They do nothing because we're going to get a biased estimate if we do nothing. The excluding patients who switch is highly prone to bias because patients typically don't switch at random. They have a reason for switching. And so the group who switch, in that sense, are almost signaling they're different from those who don't switch. So that would be a problem. If you just excluded the switchers, you're left with a biased group. There's a number of more or less complex statistical methods. One we've mentioned already, inverse probability of censoring weights. Another one is rank preserving structural failure time models. I don't know who thinks up these names, but and another one, easier one, is using a secondary baseline. Now, I think I'm just going to have a little look at the secondary baseline because it's the easier one to explain. As I've alluded or suggested already, it's quite common for switching only to happen after progression. It could happen any time, but it's quite common indeed to design the trial that you don't allow switching until patient progresses. Well, that's reasonable enough. You know, if they haven't progressed, you're not really penalising them. But once they've progressed, if you withhold the other treatment, you would appear to be penalising them. And this is definitely the case in oncology. So if switching only happens after progression, we can consider a two-stage process. And we can use the point of disease progression as a secondary baseline or a new baseline. Let's look at this graphically. Yes, why didn't I put it in black? Anyway, here we have control group who are then ultimately non-switchers, so they stay in the control group, okay? And they experience a particular period of progression-free survival on average, then a particular period of post-progression survival on average. The next group here are the control switchers, and so we assume, there's no reason to believe, they'd have different progression-free survival. But once they progress, this group switch to the other treatment, and we anticipate, as a consequence, have longer post-progression survival. So, under this approach, we identify a secondary baseline. So the original baseline was at this point, entry to the trial. We're now identifying a secondary baseline, that's the point of progression. And so what we can do is estimate a treatment effect in switchers compared to non-switchers. And switchers are doing a bit better than the non-switchers. So what we now want to come up with, this is just those two things moved up a bit, made space down here. We're coming up with a control counterfactual. Now what we mean by a control counterfactual is what would have happened if people hadn't switched? What would have happened if they hadn't switched? And to create this, what we're going to do is reduce the estimate of post-progression survival that the switchers experienced. And so we're reducing it back down. That's the principle. It makes a particular assumption. All these methods make assumptions. The key assumption is that there's no unmeasured confounders at the secondary baseline. What does that mean? No unmeasured confounders at the secondary baseline. Well, here's the secondary baseline. What this model needs is we need to be able to control for any differences between the two groups. Control for differences between switchers and non-switchers. And by assuming no unmeasured confounders, that means there's no other factors that are different between switchers and non-switchers. Everything is observable, and it might be switchers are younger than non-switchers, or whatever. But it's quite a strong assumption, and indeed untestable. But if we can make that assumption, this use for secondary baseline is one way to adjust for treatment switching. The other methods also have strong assumptions. Rank preserving structural failure time model also makes an assumption about no unmeasured confounders. No, it makes assumption about common treatment effect. Common treatment effect, yeah. What this one assumes is patients who switch get the same benefit from the new drug as patients who get the new drug straight away. I'll say that again. Patients who switch get a benefit from the new drug, and it's similar to the benefit they would have got if they'd got the new drug straight away. Now, that's another strong assumption. Because, of course, the patients who switch are a bit sicker now, and so maybe they're past the point of being able to get the benefit. So the key point, however, is all these methods have to make assumptions, and these assumptions may be quite strong, and so there really isn't any perfect method. And we're at quite an early stage in identifying in which circumstance one method's better than another.